Welcome to the Babblery, working, parenting, playing, voting, advocating, and creating as women. Both of my parents are scientists, and though I chose to go in another direction, I have a deep interest in science, especially how the advance of scientific knowledge trickles down to affect our daily lives. But in this episode, we're starting by going in the opposite direction. How do our cultural norms invade the world of science, which is supposed to be logical and evidence-based? Specifically, what's it like for women in the sciences? There's no doubt that women have made huge advances since the years when male scientists would openly tell women they didn't belong. But that doesn't mean that suddenly everyone has cast aside biases and assumptions they may not even know they have. Most of us know to check ourselves when we are doing something blatantly wrong, but at the same time, most of us aren't able to step back and question small decisions we make, from which student we call on in class to which lab worker will get a raise. These three women are at the University of California at Santa Cruz, and after we turned off the recording, they wanted to add one important point. They love this university. They love the time they spend there, and they love what they do. They are daily inspired and supported by their fellow students, the professors, and the staff. But yet, they still arrive on campus each day as women. How does that affect their experiences? And how does the treatment of women in science affect the quality of the scientific research around the world? In this conversation, we try to dissect the complex creature that is the world of scientific inquiry at universities. Listen in. I'm excited to talk to you all about the subject of women in science. I know there have been a lot of controversies over the years, from Lawrence Summers, then president of Harvard, saying that women just aren't genetically suited to study science, to substantial evidence that women are encouraged less, hired less, paid less, promoted less, and awarded less than men. As scientists, I'm sure you'd agree that in this environment, there is a lot of noise in the data, so we can't exactly come to a conclusion about nature versus nurture. But what we can do is talk about women and women's love of science and our experiences in education and work. So I'd like to start by learning a little bit about each of you. Tell us what you do and what drew you to what will you do. And also, let's talk about you as a whole person, not just the person you bring to work.
My name is Nasreen Bruman-Khoshbacht. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at UC Santa Cruz in the anthropology department, biological anthropology track, because I do paleogenomics research. So I study ancient DNA of mostly ancient human pathogens. So I look at how diseases have changed over time, over like the past couple of thousands of years in their genomes. I started out at community college and then went to the University of Montana, where I got my bachelor's degree. And then I worked for a little bit in between that. And then I ended up here at UC Santa Cruz for my doctorate degree. And I'm also the president of events for UCSC's Women in Science and Engineering.
My name is Sarah Claus, and I work in the biology teaching labs at UC Santa Cruz. I knew that I wanted to be in biology since 5. I declared my major. Both my parents are in academia. My mom got a very late start going back to graduate school at 40. I decided not to go to graduate school. It was a decision because I always really loved my job. I was a research lab manager for 15 years and then taught K through 12 when my kids were born for about that same amount of time. Now I'm sort of regretting it and thinking I might have to go back, but I love my job at the biology teaching labs. Definitely have experienced the lack of equity and some pretty interesting other situations that are very much women related. But I just keep fighting for what I think is right. And the biology teaching labs is my platform.
Hi, I'm Shanna Howard. I am a fifth-year graduate student at UCSC. I'm in the microbiology and environmental toxicology department. My research is focused more on the toxicology side, so I look at how exposure to high levels of metals during development, so infancy and childhood, can then impact behavior and brain development throughout life. I got my degree, my undergraduate degree in biology from UC Davis. And then I spent a couple of years working in environmental education. So like outdoor ed, basically. And I've always loved biology and learning about, living things and that kind of stuff. And I feel very fortunate because both of my grandparents on my mom's side have advanced degrees. My grandma on my dad's side was a nurse. And so, kind of STEM and science and engineering and these things have been kind of big in my family and, have been encouraged in me, which I feel super fortunate to have. And yeah, so I'm also co-president with Nazreen of the Women in Science and Engineering group on campus. And so our kind of goal is to, promote equity in STEM, equity and inclusion in STEM. And so it's been a really great community, to see women and other people who want to promote women in science.
Sarah, I noticed you mentioned something about your mom going back to school, and that's something that is an interesting theme in women's lives. That's true of my mom as well.
My mom got her degree in medical anthropology, took her 12 years. She had 4 children, and she got that, I believe, at Cal State East Bay. And then when I was 16, she also had a med tech degree. And then she quickly realized she wanted more and went to Stanford for her PhD in immunology, microbiology, in studying infectious disease when I was 16. So when she was 40, and she worked a very long, very successful career, both at NIH in Montana, where they have an infectious disease research institute, and then she worked first at Middlebury, actually, University, and then at the NIH, and then at Tennessee. She was not given tenure at the NIH. Once she left, there was a revamping of the situation there. She very much felt like she was not given tenure due to old boys network sort of stuff. She had a science paper. She was very well published and very well funded. She went on to do incredibly well at Tennessee, University of Tennessee, and left with research money. She has been a role model for me.
Do you think that it's important for women to see these unusual paths as a normal part of a career?
Well, I think I learned a lot from my mom's career, and I started working in her lab when I was about 16 at Stanford. I'd come in on the weekends. They would all say, "I can't believe you're going to graduate school with kids at home." And she goes, "Are you kidding? This is a break." In comparison, it's like I get to get away. Although we raised our children very differently and we lived very different lives, I still feel the impacts that she felt choosing to have a family. One thing she did tell me later in life was that the best time to have children is before you start, graduate school's fine, but when you're doing your postdoc, you need to focus on, everybody is expecting you to produce, so this just to me points out the decisions we have to make as women. Mm-hmm. When is it best to go back to school? Will we ever have children if we decide to go to school? And then in my work situation now, I see it very interesting. Both of my bosses are, my PI and my manager are both male, and they both have children. I'm the one who has grown children, so I don't have any restrictions on my time. And I see it but they do, and they are very much expected, because both their wives work, to participate in their kids' upraising. And I'm not going to say it's 50-50, because I don't think that's ever very realistic. But I find that an interesting change of events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And what about your own relationship? Did going back to work have an effect on your own relationship?
It was pretty amazing, actually. My husband did kind of an early retirement from Cedars-Sinai. He's involved in 2 companies. One's his and one he's the president of. So we didn't have health insurance. And I came up here to help take care of my father, who was aging. This was a temporary job that turned into a full no end date career position. What's really hard for me now is that I spend a lot of time working, and so trying to fight for equity it's like another job on its own, you know? So I wish we would do the right thing and just promote people that you see them being undervalued or underpaid, but you really have to fight for it. And I think it's a hard thing to do. And I'm putting my ducks in a row right now, trying to get that ready to do. I have 30 years of experience, 15 in research, 15 in teaching. I left research to raise children, and also I taught K through 12 science. So I've always been in science. Then coming back to research in this, in the biology teaching labs, which is a great, combination of my two career paths. So I just have a hard time with the equity of it, Mm-hmm. And we've had people leaving this job, like 3 people have left since I've been here in 4 years because of the equity.
Sarah brought up so many things, and I want to ask you I'm going to back up first before we get into the whole question of fighting for equity, because of where you two are in your lives, which is pre-children or maybe not having children at all. And I would love to hear from you both about what I assume that Sarah's not the only woman that you've met who's had career interruptions and also felt that choosing to raise children can dampen your opportunities in the future. And how does this affect you as a young scientist coming up?
Maybe Shanna, you should answer first.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So first of all, I kind of want to talk about my family experience. So another woman in my family who went back and got her degree was my grandma. She actually got her PhD when she was 60 years old in psychology. So, I think I have, growing up, knowing her, knowing that she went back to school, later in her life and got this degree has kind of been, inspiring for me in the fact that I can kind of see, timeline, everybody's timeline is different. And so just because you don't, have the traditional timeline where you graduate undergrad, get your PhD, do your postdoc and all of that, like whatever your timeline is fine. And she actually retired recently at like 80 years old. So she just found that really rewarding. And I think for me too, I know so many of my friends and family members and people who, are in their careers, in the midst of their careers and like are having their first child or thinking about having children or, really wanting children, but not feeling like it's the right time, and so on and so forth. I think personally for me, I actually don't really feel like having children is something that I want to do in my life. I think at 20 years old or 28 years old, everyone had many years of people saying, oh, you'll change your mind. Like, well, maybe I will, but maybe I won't. And so I feel like a little bit less pressure in that regard. And then when I think about like, oh, just entertaining the idea, maybe if I did want to have kids, like what would that look like? And it seems very stressful, from a career perspective, from a financial perspective. And then thinking about like, oh, the men in my life, like how many of the men are, experiencing these same kind of problems, issues, the same conundrum. And it's like, haven't talked to anybody who's like feeling like having a kid as a man is going to interrupt their career.
I noticed something that you said that I wrote down, which was stressful. And I just will point out, I have to point out to young women who have not had children that yes, it is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It is also equally as amazing.
I personally am not interested in having children. I enjoy spending time with children. I was a camp counselor for a couple of years. Like it's fun, but like at the end of the day, I want to like give them to somebody else. I don't want to have to take them home with me. So, but I definitely have a lot of friends, family members who are thinking about like, how do I make it work? How do I have children in the timeline that I want and still be able to pursue my goals without without it affecting like my possibilities for being promoted. Because I mean, even though we're not supposed to discriminate against people for pregnancy and for having children, like people do discriminate against people for being pregnant and for taking maternity leave and for having to, have a flexible schedule to be able to take care of kids. Also, it's a little bit upsetting that like it is always like the women that are expected to leave work to like go pick up kids rather. I mean, not always, but like I feel like it is the norm.
It is the norm. I can tell you that everyone I've known has known in their extended, like in my extended preschool, my kids both went to the same preschool, so that we were there for a really long time. And in that extended group of people, there was one dad who quit his career because his wife he was like thinking, oh, I might want to change careers anyway. So this sort of makes sense for my life right now. And his wife was really on the, career. If I stop now, this isn't going to be good. And then you look at that and you think, wait, if she hadn't felt that taking a couple years to be at home with developing children was so detrimental to her career, would she have made the different choice? I don't know. But I do know that he loved it and had a great time with their kids. So, but all couples, and I'm going to also just interject here because one of the things that I have to confront in doing this podcast is that there's a lot of discussion now about the word women and childbearing, and it's so intertwined. There's the gender, there's the gender sort of cultural construct issue. There's also the physical issue. If you physically carry a baby for 9 months, I think a lot of people who don't have that capability have absolutely no way of even understanding. I think that people who have a menstrual cycle at least can understand that much of not being able to control your body, that your body does this thing, and that your body is intrinsically involved. Whereas with men who are fathers, as much as they're involved, their body's not intrinsically involved in the child rearing and childbearing. So it's a really interesting distinction to me. So, getting to the question of equity, let's talk about what school and work is like for you. And maybe, imagine if you were sitting next to a white man who had everything the same in his life, what would be different for you?
We don't have to imagine. Yeah. There's, I don't know. So my personal experience as a woman who is visibly not white, I have seen very clear instances where white men or just men in general have been offered more money for doing the same thing, or people will make assumptions that somebody else who has the same level of experience, the same level of knowledge as me, people will go to them first and just assume that I don't know what I'm talking about. Whereas that, of course, that man, he of course will know, the answer to my question. And it happens in people. I don't think it's an intentional slight against people all the time. I think it's an unconscious bias thing, where even if people think, I'm very progressive, I believe that women should have equal rights. I believe, or everybody should have equal rights. I believe that everybody should be able to pursue science as a career. I think sometimes if we don't confront our own unconscious biases and are not aware of them, we can let them interfere with our with the way that we would like to see the world, if that makes sense.
Welcome back to the Babblery. This is your host, Suki Wessling. I am speaking with 3 women scientists, Nasreen Bruman-Hochbach, Shanna Howard, and Sarah Claus, who study and work at the University of California at Santa Cruz. We've been discussing what it's like to be a woman scientist now. Although the days of outright hostility are mostly past, women scientists face implicit biases that remain unquestioned. In this next segment, we discuss what happens in the classroom, the lab, and in funding that makes women's jobs harder, along with having to be leaders in the effort to combat bias.
People kind of will often just because and like assume that you're not the expert on something or assume that you're not the first person to go to. And I also wanted to bring up like me and Nazreen are and Sarah too. We're all part of this Women in Science and Engineering group, right? And so this group is intended to promote equity and promote women in STEM. And if you look at the composition of WISE, it's like almost all women. And so, the kind of effort and, time and energy and mental energy spent on like promoting equity, like falls to the people that are, suffering from inequities, right? So women and people of color are often kind of the ones who are expected to be part of these diversity, equity, inclusion groups. And then on top of all of their research and normal work, they're expected to do all of this extra labor to, help people. And then, the white men of the world aren't the ones that are asked to be on those committees and put in the effort. And obviously, I think, of course, we need women and people of color and historically excluded people because their lived experience is what we're trying to help, so their perspective is obviously important. But I think that, to have everybody participating in that labor of like making science more equitable is really important. But that often falls to the, people who suffer from it.
And Sarah, you mentioned that that you are on the beginnings of feeling that you're going to be spending more time on this. Can you explain why someone in your position feels the need to get involved in equity fights, not just for yourself but for others?
A couple situations. I went to the town hall. I don't know the date, but it was Paul Koch, Town Hall, Science Hill. And I asked a question. He was one of the major points that he was making is that we are going to be working on equity and our undergraduates. And so I called him out on that in a chat, which I'm pretty bold in those Zoom meetings, and so I called him out and I just wrote, so what exactly are you doing to promote equity and, inclusivity and diversity on this campus? And it sent me down a very long rabbit hole. And he got me in contact with, I think she was the vice chancellor, dean of DEI here on Science Hill. And that woman and I worked feverishly for months to get a certain situation taken care of. That was basically an inclusivity issue. There was some bullying going on, and it ended up with a graduate student who was severely bullied, in my opinion. And so I had to report it as a mandated reporter. And at the end of that, I ended up having heart palpitations and was brought to the ER. So we were a Zio patch for 2 weeks. It was really stressful. I didn't feel safe here. I was working 11-hour days over the summer, and I ended up having, it sounds kind of unreasonable, but I was wearing a whistle around my neck for a while because I was scared I was going to run into this person. And UC Santa Cruz didn't have a bullying policy for their faculty yet. It's being voted on this month. Part of my letter to the dean was addressing the lack of change. I'm an alumni here. I graduated in 91, and I come back to a situation that I don't see resolved. I didn't have a single female professor when I was here. Now you do have female professors, I hear. I don't think there are very many of color, and our TAs, which I've suggested be more representative of our student body. I got a fair amount of pushback. And I feel like I now have a reputation of being the staff person in the biology teaching lab that's like causing all sorts of problems, you know? So that's what got me started, actually, was that situation. And then in my email to the dean, I said, I have two big things I'm going to be working on right now. Inclusivity, diversity, well, three. I'm working on DEI. So diversity, inclusivity, and my equity. And our equity, we are having people leaving this lab because they cannot afford to stay here. And we do, I don't know, Shanna has TA'd a lot in the classes and we've worked together a lot. And she knows what we do. We produce all the reagents, set everything up, do all the logistics. It's very undergraduate focused. I literally clean my own classrooms. I sweep, vacuum, and mop my own classrooms because I want our students to have a respectful place to work and get their education. So I haven't really had time to work on my equity issue.
You said that you didn't feel safe and were wearing a whistle. And do you think that you would have felt that way if you were male and having an altercation in the in your workplace with someone, you know, something verbal? Would you have felt physically threatened?
Well, I'm a small woman too. And I'm also a survivor. So I think those things play a part in it. I'm a very proud survivor. I have two boys that tower over me. Do I think that they are ever unsafe? Yes, I worry about them too. I don't know that in this day and age that being a woman or being a man a white male even makes you safe.
But do you think, I mean, I'm talking more about the perception.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think I have age discrimination to boot. You know, I'm 56. You know, what's this old lady doing telling me what to do? She doesn't have a degree.
Well, for the record, you don't look old to me, but yeah, I mean, that's something else that, you know, comes up with women. I was thinking, I just recently read a piece about hair, women and hair. And I've been thinking about the fact that men very seldom, except in certain professions, maybe politicians, men might be more likely to dye their hair. But women, American women, overwhelmingly working American women do dye their hair.
And probably dress up a whole lot more too.
Spend a lot more money on their hair, a lot more time on their hair and clothes. Yeah.
Yeah. My great grandma on my mom's side, she dyed her hair until, you know, she was 94 years old. She would not be seen with any gray hair whatsoever. And even my grandma recently just started, you know, fully going gray. So it's a huge thing. And when you're expected to spend all this extra money, because if you don't, then people will be, you know, discriminating against you or whatever it may be, you know, there's all this pressure. And so that's less money and time that you have to do other things.
There's this pressure on women to behave certain ways. And so I wanted to ask you two young people, because I know that just my very unscientific look around at young women says to me that a lot of young female scientists are not worrying so much about clothes and hair and makeup, which I love. But do you feel that there is pressure to look a certain way, or do you think that that's gotten better?
I personally do still feel like there is pressure to keep yourself looking like put together. You know, have your makeup done, your hair done, wearing nice clothes. I think it is becoming maybe more acceptable for people, or maybe people just feel like they care less about what other people think, which I really admire that.
But just, you know, anecdotally, I have a friend who, you know, women will wear leggings around. I often wear leggings to work, but her male boss basically said to her something like, "Oh, you're not going to wear leggings to work, are you? Like, you're better than that." So, yeah, so it's definitely better, I feel like, than, you know, 50 years ago, but there's still a lot more policing on what women are wearing and that kind of thing. So, you know, I don't feel a huge pressure to look super formal, but I also do, you know, take care when I'm getting ready I want to look nice and I, put my makeup on and all that stuff. So less pressure, but it's still there for sure.
Also, my 15 years of teaching, because I'm small and K through 12, I put a lot of effort into looking different than the kids. So always never wore jeans to work. Absolutely not. Maybe Friday, a colored pair of jeans. But so I kind of come from that a little bit. And I understand that in teaching in general, I believe that is still happening. Professors and people will wear button down instead of a t-shirt on a teaching day, both men and women. I don't even know if I'm respected more or less how I dress when I'm here.
Yeah. To follow up on that, like I completely agree. Like the feeling like you should look different from the people that you're teaching and trying to make yourself look more put together for that purpose. Completely agree. I also am very short and small, and I look very young. I look a lot younger than I am. I was once, when I was in my mid-20s, accidentally mistaken for a middle schooler by the school teacher. When I was on the train, she was trying to herd her class off of the train, and she was ushering me to get off. And I was like, no, I'm not in your class. So
I'm circling back to that question of if you had a white male sitting next to you with the same credentials. And I'm not sure we heard from Shanna and Nasreen about that so much, about the sense, I mean, you're both students, but you have research opportunities, you have classroom situations. Have you experienced, do you feel like there's a sense that women have that they're not being treated the same?
I think in a lot of instances, yes. I don't think it's necessarily all the time in every class and every situation. But I do think that there are certain people who make it, who create an environment that can make us feel uncomfortable. Also, if there are any people listening who sit with a manspreading position, please understand that manspreading is a real problem, and it is a lot more. It makes the environment around you much less welcoming for other people. So please don't do it.
So physically, you feel that sometimes physically you're not comfortable.
Yeah, you're not allowed to take up as much space. And I think that it depends on the situation that you're in. So there are, if you're in a class where the professor is old white dude who's very traditional and very the good old days where we used to do everything, I don't know, more only men could be scientists. And so I think that when there are situations where people create the environment of their class to be more hostile to women, I guess, or hostile to people who not just women, of course, it's anybody who doesn't fit their idea of what a scientist should be, right? So that could be non-binary people, it could be trans people, cis women, people of color. If you don't fit into their box of what they think a good scientist should be, they might treat you differently. And then it encourages other students who do fit that box to treat you differently as well. And that is one of the reasons why retention is such an issue in the sciences as well, because when you are in an environment where you do not feel like you're welcome, where you don't feel like you are accepted for who you are or respected, you're not going to want to stick around. I mean, if you have to just fight to just stay in place, to be able to stick to what it is you're doing, that everyone else around you is just that's their baseline, that they're able to just not have to work to stay in that area, it's not sustainable.
That was great, Naz. But yeah, I'll just add on too. I think a big part of it, when you're somebody who's in a situation, whether you're a woman, right, or somebody who's transgender, or someone who doesn't fit into that box, and regardless of whether or not your professor or your PI or whomever is like actively discriminating against you, there's always this kind of hyper awareness of like, did they make that comment because of what I'm wearing? Or did they give me a bad grade because, I wrote this paper in a way that like resonates with me, but isn't like, the way that someone who's in STEM would like normally quote unquote write a paper or so on and so forth. Like if you're even just not sure about that and you're kind of fixating on these things and like experiencing stereotype threat where, or there's all this research that shows there's like all of these kind of barriers that Naz was mentioning. It just makes it a lot harder whether or not someone makes, an overt comment to you that's racist or sexist or whatever it is. Like you're always kind of thinking about that and it's in the back of your mind all the time. So
I'd like to add to that. Part of that email that I sent to our dean, who I hear is a very wonderful guy, actually. I mean, but I was saying that mandatory classes on discrimination and sexual discrimination, these sorts of things, were very helpful. And he was saying, "Oh, I think there's a lot of pushback. I don't like that." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry. I think that the people who actually benefit from them are the people who are being discriminated against, and the people who are observing discrimination. And it gives you an idea, what is discrimination?" I'm personally, microaggression is like, I don't know who wrote that basis, because it's full on aggression as far as I'm concerned. My point was all these mandatory trainings benefit the people who it's happening to, and the perpetrators probably don't enjoy it.
It's interesting. I was just reading, there's new research that says that mandatory trainings don't seem to make a difference to the perpetrators, but your point is that they are empowering to the people who might be discriminated against to be able to identify it. And because a lot of times that's something that I think is really important to keep in mind, is that a lot of times people don't stop something because they don't know whether it's just the way it is. They don't know whether that professor treats other people the way they treat them, or whether it's, both of you mentioned not really knowing whether, some comment or something is because of how you're dressed or, your physical presence or anything like that. Welcome back to the Babblery. This is your host, Suki Wessling. I am speaking with three women scientists, Nasreen Rumaan-Hoshbach, Shanna Howard, and Sarah Claus, who study and work at the University of California at Santa Cruz. We've been discussing what it's like to be a woman scientist now, and in this segment, we move to the question of how to be more inclusive and to offer more opportunities. We discuss how attracting more non-traditional scientists will improve the quality of scientific research in ways we can't even predict. I wanted to move to the idea of why diversity of gender and other diversity is particularly important in scientific inquiry. There's plenty of stories in the past of science where gender assumptions or bias actually played a role in gathering poor quality data or misinterpreting data. And so can you speak a little bit about the science you do and how important you think it is for women to be involved and why?
I can speak to ancient DNA studies. I think it's very important to have, and I think this also goes for really any field, but I think it's important to have a diversity of people and a diversity of opinions and perspectives when it comes to designing research, interpreting data, because if you are only looking at data from your own perspective, you might be missing like a whole, the entire story, essentially. In ancient DNA, we've recently, well, not recently, but like recently it's become more of a widespread conversation, which I'm very happy about. there's this issue where a lot of the researchers are only coming from like a very specific background, right? Like a lot of them are European of ancestry, and then men, and coming from like a very narrow mindset about how we treat the dead, and like what sort of perspectives of like life after death and things like that. And so when these people are going and researching, taking samples of skeletons of people's ancestors and destroying them and coming up with these stories about these other people's ancestors without talking to the descendants and getting their perspectives and including them in the research, you're not going to have the right story. Like you're not going to actually know what's going on. So if you're excluding large portions of our population, large like groups of people, going to completely miss something you would have otherwise seen.
And I would add what you can bring to the study, like what they can learn. I find that in the more diverse the classroom, the more diverse the teaching environment, the more opportunities there are to spark an interest or an idea or something like that.
Many scientific fields will kind of get stuck in a certain way of thinking or a certain way of doing research or approaching a problem, or even, identifying what problems they think are important. And so to have people from diverse backgrounds who have a different view of the world or a different personal understanding of, whatever the topic may be, that just gives you so much more ability to like ask important questions that are actually going to help people, and then interpret your data in such a way that, you're getting the full story. So yeah, literally can't overstate how important it is to just have a really diverse, group of people working in science in every field, regardless of what it is. So, and we're slowly kind of creeping toward that, but obviously there are so many other barriers that prevent people from ever getting to the point where they're involved in research at that level, that we're, still fighting against.
I remember I was an adult when I first read about this, and there was a study that said women have heart attacks less often than men, but they're dying of them much more because they'll go in and the doctor will say, "Oh, that's just indigestion," and send them away. And so that until you have women asking these questions, or people with different cultural assumptions, people with different cultures not making the same assumptions, you are going to miss, as you said, a large part of the picture.
Right. Yeah, I think it was just big news recently. A Black medical student basically created kind of a textbook that had pictures of, skin diseases or whatever, and how they appeared on Black people's skin, which obviously is, often different than how it's going to appear on a white person's skin, or maybe it's more apparent or whatever. And so like, this is a person who, as a Black student, they're like, this is a real huge area where if I'm seeing a Black patient, like I literally have no reference material for what, whatever disease is going to look like. So yeah, just another example of like so many different things where having someone's perspective and someone saying like, actually, this is important. And actually, studying women's health, in the context of women is, important.
And I would chime in my experience in the ER. I had a female Asian doctor, and I was very happy because she really identified some things that I needed to pay attention to. And I felt really listened to.
Like the idea of hysteria has also been with our society for a very, very long time, where women are just not believed when we say we're in pain. And like, so my own personal experience, I have endometriosis, which I was very recently diagnosed with. I have been having symptoms of endometriosis since I was 11 years old, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 29. So it's a very, very long time that I was going to doctors and saying, I'm having these problems. I'm in a lot of pain, telling them all of my symptoms and them saying, well, there's nothing wrong with you. It's all in your head. People will, a lot of doctors, even like, honestly, a lot of doctors who are women, it comes down to it, they are taught within a framework of how things are. And so like without knowing that they're being misogynistic and dismissing women's pain, like they will also do that. And so it's up to everybody, I think, to be aware of, your own biases that you have and kind of take people seriously when they say that they are in pain.
If you were to go about what you do, starting today when you walk out the door, and everything about gender had fallen away, what more would women be adding to what's happening in the world? And I want to start with you, Sarah, because one of the things that you talked about was how much time and energy, and the fact that doing this actually made you physically ill, that going through that situation, you lost time, you lost productivity because of this situation. What do you feel would be the effect on your field to have women not go through those things?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we're all put in this position of having to be super women. We have to be awesome at everything. And it would be great to just do what I want to do and lighten up some of my brain space to be creative. I think about my two boys who are white, and my husband is white. And I think, some people similar, and it's a weird comparison, but some people wonder about climate change, and it's so overwhelming. All these things are so overwhelming. But if we share this burden, if we all take it on as something that we can all do something positive for and give up some of that control, it isn't so burdensome on that one person or that one group of people. For me, I guess specifically to that answer would be, it would give me more time to do the things like my equity. I would have had a raise by now,
Personally, I'm lucky in that I don't experience too much, overt kind of misogyny or, discrimination, as a able-bodied white woman, I'm a woman, but in many other ways, I'm very privileged. But I still feel like, just in terms of the mental load and like suffering from imposter syndrome and wondering, if I'm doing well enough, or, even just the time that I spend getting ready in the morning, or, the time I spend on my emails, making sure they sound friendly enough, like all of this stuff, all these tiny little things that you are kind of always just aware of in the back of your mind. It would be less, like Sarah said, mentally burdensome to free up some of that energy for being creative or, getting more of my work done in a day, any of this stuff. So it would be nice. Let's put it that way.
Shanna put it perfectly. I really think the mental load of writing friendly emails and constantly questioning whether or not you belong here. Imposter syndrome is real. And it's difficult to get through the day sometimes when you're just questioning whether or not you are smart enough, if you are, good enough, if you're talented enough to be in the position that you fought so hard to get into in the first place. Yeah, my friends and I used to always joke, like, what I wouldn't give to be a mediocre white man. Like, your life, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure lots of white men have very difficult lives as well, but there's a lot of privilege in there that not everybody gets to experience.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's, it's worth always mentioning that, of course, every person has their own challenges. And as a teacher, that's something I like to remind my students. Every person you meet has their own challenges. And if you focus too much on thinking about, their privileges, you don't focus on your challenges and doing the best you can do. So, but that, you all mentioned things that are pretty unique to women. There are very few men out there who would think, even probably be surprised to hear that you sit and look at an email and we go through this process. We write it and then you stop yourself before you hit send and you're like, oh, I'm going to soften that verb. I'm going to turn that into a question, right?
Yeah. And then after you send it, you panic read it again.
and then you edit it in your mind and yes. So I would like to end on a positive note, a little bit of "We've come a long way, baby." Two of you might be too young to remember that. An ad campaign, by the way. So talk about something that you are particularly proud of, something about your own achievements or perhaps the way that things have changed or in the process of changing around you. Go ahead and brag.
I just want to say I'm really proud of the work that we're doing at UCSC Women in Science and Engineering. I think we've created so many programs the last couple of years, even, I think really are making a difference. Both undergraduates at UCSC and like students in our communities who are in elementary school, middle school, high school. I've interacted with so many students in the past year at public schools in our area who remind me why it is that I got into science in the first place. Of like, it reminds me that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Like having the community of women, mostly women in WISE who, are all like really badass scientists and also just like really amazing people. And yeah, I mean, we do one program called Science Impacting Society, or SIS, and it's basically, we bring middle school students, mostly girls, to campus and give them lab tours and, do hands-on science activities with them. And it's like, of everything that I've done as a graduate student at UCSC, doing these events with the students and like really getting them excited about science and exposing them to, amazing female researchers has been just really, really awesome. It's been the best part of grad school by far.
Teaching and the love of science is something that I'm really proud of. Like I said at the beginning, I knew I wanted to be I declared my major at 5, and it was not a joke. I really did. I used to tell my students that. I said, I know I love this, and this is what I'm going to do. I don't know how well I'm going to do it or if I can do it, but I'm going to try. And one of our boys he learned how to read out of the North American Audubon bird book, like he's an incredible birder. He's the anthropologist. And another one is just like our pet whisperer at home. And I think teaching people about science and creating a very inclusive environment to do that. As a teacher, I put a lot of energy into that. There was a child who was bullied, and I declared there will be none of that here in this classroom. You're working together in a group. And the parents came up and thanked me for it. There was another person who came after her 3rd year and told me her name was being changed from, I'm just going to say, Allison to Alan, and I said, you are so brave doing this, and I'm going to try my best. She was tanking as a 3rd grader and as a 4th grader, all, absolutely incredible grades. And I just being able to provide an atmosphere or an environment for teaching science that includes everybody I'm really proud of that. I'm very proud of that. And I do, unfortunately, have the imposter syndrome also, but at 56. But, you know, I don't know what to say about that. That's got to be broken.
I think having positive role models who look like you and have, share similar identities with you in the same field that you are interested in is really helpful. If you don't see yourself represented in doing the work that you want to do, it makes you feel like maybe I'm not, this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not allowed to be here. Having more of us speak up and be visible in our positions, I think, is really important.
Bringing our perspective, our women's perspective, is for me very powerful. It really helped me in the summer, the inclusivity problem I was dealing with. My mama bear came out big time. And she wasn't my child, but she was somebody's child. And I think it's really important to still love, whoever you identify with, like in yourself. I mean, this is, and I really do believe that different ethnicity than me, different first language, didn't matter. We were women. I'm a mom. I'm going to fight for you.
I just want to say, I think that not everyone is aware of how bad the situation really is in the sciences in terms of representation of women. Statistics that I have seen from recent reports are anywhere from 25 to 30% of scientists are women, which is ridiculous because we make up about 50% of the population. And it's even worse in certain fields. So like computer sciences, it's super low representation. It's worse for women of color in terms of representation, in terms of retention, like whether or not somebody can, even if they declare their major as an undergraduate, do they finish that degree? In terms of pay disparity. We've made some really great moves in the last few decades, but we still have a long way to go. So the fight's not over.
I'd like to thank Nasreen, Shanna, and Sarah for speaking so honestly and openly about their experiences as women scientists. Visit babblery.com for links and information mentioned in this podcast. The Babblery is produced with support from KSQD in Santa Cruz, California.